Hello, everybody. My name is Will Riccadella with Unbiased America. I'm here with Professor Tim Hsiao from Florida Southwestern State College and Florida Gulf Coast University. He's a professor of philosophy. You can check out his work at timhsiao.org. That's timhsiao.org. His latest piece is on the morality of factory farming, which is pretty interesting. There's a lot of misinformation out there about that, certainly from an ethical standpoint, and Tim will clear that up for you. I did want to start off with talking about rights and the non-aggression principle. But first, I think, just from an American standpoint, the American founding and so on, Thomas Jefferson, who primarily writes the Declaration of Independence, talks about self-evident truths and natural law. And your camera went down. That's all right.
Sorry.
You still there? Great.
Yeah.
So this conception of rights, this conception of life, liberty, and property, I think some people think it's just this ideological, kind of this right-wing conception. You know what I mean? I think people are also don't misunderstand who those rights belong to, and they often attribute them to groups. I don't know, gay rights, actions, reproductive rights. I don't know, any type of right, human rights. But rarely are people ever ascribing them to who they belong to, which is the individual rights. But how can I defend these? Let's say that I'm talking to somebody and I need to defend my right to property. Where does it come from? Why do we have it?
So, on a natural rights view, rights, every single right we have is grounded in human nature. And by human nature, I mean what promotes our flourishing, what promotes our well-being. So the reason we have a right is because there are certain conditions that have to be met in order for us to flourish. And we need those things in order to live the good life, in order to fulfill our moral duties. And so that's where rights come in. Rights are claims to that which we need to fulfill our function, if you will. So on the natural rights view, there is really no such thing as a right to do wrong, because the idea of a right is that which perfects us. And so there is no right to destroy ourselves. There is no right to mutilate ourselves. Rights are only for what is good for us.
Right. So rights presuppose a duty, right? It's not the right to it's not the freedom to do as you want. It's the freedom to do as you ought to do, correct?
Yeah. No rights without responsibilities. Rights are rooted in our moral obligation to develop our talents, to use our reason, to flourish as human beings. And that's why we have rights.
Okay, so when I say I have a right to, let's say I have a right to arms, to arm myself. I have an individual God-given right to self-defense or to bear arms. Does that come from the same place? I mean, people are going to say, well, you don't have a right. No one made, you weren't born with a gun, so you don't have a right to, bear arms. What would you say to that?
So there definitely is a natural right to self-defense. And that natural right to self-defense is based on the more basic natural right to life. You can't flourish unless you have life. Now, with respect to the type of arms you use in defending yourself, I would say there is no natural right to own a gun, in the sense that guns are artifacts. There's stuff we invent. We're not born, needing a gun. But guns do happen to be very good means of self-defense. Guns are very effective at self-defense. And so certainly you could extend the right of self-defense, right to bear arms, to guns. What the right to self-defense says basically is that we have a right to defend our own life, and that we have a corresponding right to the necessary means to defend our own life. So I would say that we have a very strong right to own guns, but I wouldn't say that's a natural right.
Right. And where does that right, well, we'll get into that a little bit later, but I want to go into the non-aggression principle. Where does that stem from? I mean, to me, if you've read John Stuart Mill, you've seen a lot of this before in the harm principle. But I mean, where is that derived from? Is that just particularly derived from this idea of self-ownership, as you own yourself as property, and that rights aren't necessarily an obligation, right? It's just that you have these rights, and it's the freedom to do what you want to do. It's more libertine per se.
Yeah, many libertarians say that, and I'll cover the harm principle in a moment. Many libertarians say that we have a right to, we own ourselves, and our owning ourselves, our self-ownership, is the basis for which we have all of the rights we do. The problem with that is ownership itself presupposes rights. And so ownership can't be the ground of rights. And moreover, the libertarian argument is that, well, we own ourselves in the same way that, we own our cars, we own our computers, we own, the cup on our table. But we can do whatever we want with it because we have this absolute right of ownership over
The
it.
problem with that, though, let me bring this up, is like, how can a car own itself? I mean, I think you brought that up. You said ownership presupposes rights. So it's like, how can one thing own itself? A car? How does a desk own itself? How does a property? You know what I mean? You're getting kind of into like some logical inconsistencies. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, libertarians don't make that argument. They say that we own ourselves in the same way we own our own property. Now, the difference between that is owning a piece of property and owning ourselves, if that does make sense, are very different things. A piece of property, like a cup, has no inherent value. It has no rights. It's not a moral entity. Whereas persons, human beings, are very different from mere property. We have intrinsic value, we have rights, we have duties. And so if you want to say we own ourselves, that's fine. There is a sense in which we do own ourselves, but that ownership is constrained by more basic facts about our flourishing, basic facts about the rights we have, the responsibilities that we have to other people. And so when the libertarian says that we own ourselves in the same way that we own our own property, they're smuggling in a very controversial philosophical anthropology that needs to be justified. They're smuggling in a conception about the nature of man that is not at all self-evident, and that in fact conflicts with many traditions that teach that we have duties to develop our own talents and duties to other people.
Right. So that some part of us, and this goes back to natural law, and when I say a car can't own itself, it means a car cannot create itself. So therefore, how can something that somebody else created be owned, by itself? I didn't create Will Riccadella. I just, what I mean? It was nature, or to a degree, if you want to say nature's God that created me. Therefore, he's endowed with me certain, tools or, mechanisms in order to flourish. Correct? I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't want to, strawman the libertarian view. The libertarian view is that we own ourselves in the same way we own our own property. But there's a big difference between beings and your property, and that we have responsibilities. Just inanimate objects don't. We have duties to develop our own talents, duties to other people. And so to the extent which we do own ourselves, that right of ownership is constrained by our more basic responsibilities. So we may not use our own body ourselves to destroy some part of us because we have that prior obligation to realize our own flourishing, to develop our talents. And so when the libertarian wants to extend ownership to cover just about anything that the individual wants to do, well, that rests on a very controversial conception of human nature that is not at all self-evident. I want to say something about the harm principle. Appeal to this idea of, well, I'm a consenting adult, we're consenting adults, we can do whatever we want so long as we consent. If there's consent, there's no harm, because they're voluntarily agreeing to do this or that thing. Two problems with that. First, the meaning of harm, the nature of harm itself rests on whatever moral theory you adopt. So it's not as if you can just smuggle this in and take it for granted. I mean, there's many types of harm. There's physical harm, mental harm, harm to my job, harm to my family, harm to my religious life, harm just in every aspect of my life. And so if you want to speak of harm, we have to adopt some theory of flourishing that lets us distinguish between harms and benefits.
Right. So that's him saying a harm principle or NAP is already presupposing some sort of moral, objective moral code, correct?
Yeah, and I also want the appeal to consent as like a master key that justifies anything. The problem with consent is that to consent to something is to give somebody permission to do something that would otherwise be forbidden. You're giving somebody permission to do something. But you can only give somebody permission to do something if you have that permission to begin with. And so to appeal to consent, you are, as I guess, a standard of morality, you can't do that because appeals to consent themselves rely on an underlying moral framework, an underlying conception of what man is and the activities to which we can and cannot do. It's not as if consent can justify anything, because we can consent to things that are bad for us. And the natural law theorist says that you don't have a right to do things that are bad for you because they conflict with your flourishing.
Right. So if I'm to say I have complete self-ownership and I have this right to kill myself or a right to do drugs, I'm going against the arguments that the founders had, the original classical liberals had, for property, life, and liberty, correct?
Yeah, I mean, when the founders spoke of the pursuit of happiness, they didn't just mean it makes you happy. No, they had a certain, their arguments were, on a certain moral and religious foundation where you do have a right to liberty. You do have a right to pursuit of happiness. But what constitutes happiness is what fulfills you as a human being. What constitutes happiness is what fulfills your obligation. It's what a better human being. It's not literally just doing whatever you want to yourself. That's what most modern-day libertarians think, but that's not what the classical sense of the pursuit of happiness.
But isn't religion just blind belief? I mean, isn't it just, it's just a book with words in it, and it's just based on somebody's blind belief. I've never seen a God, so therefore I can't scientifically prove his existence, so I'm just taking this stuff, completely unhinged from reality. I mean, or is...
Yeah, I mean, so the issue with an appeal to the moral and religious foundations of our civilization is that many people think that, well, morality is a matter of opinion. Religion is a matter of opinion. You can't show that there is a God. Well, first, I would say that you can show there is a God. There are very good arguments for the existence of God. And in fact, I would say that the existence of morality itself is an argument for the existence of God. Now, that would take us down a long path, and I could talk more about that if you want. A second point I'd bring up is that all of us, when people say that morality is something we make up, when morality is religious, they're really just paying lip service to that idea. Nobody really is a consistent relativist. Nobody really believes that morality is something we make up. Just ask them about something they really care about.
Yeah, so, there's this strain now today, in philosophy and political science courses and social, sociology courses of postmodernism. And I often discuss this on the show. I often write about it. And literally the conception is, or their tagline is, it's the end of reason and rationale. That postmodernism's claim is that there is no truth and it's all social constructs. And their goal is to expose these constructs and deconstruct them. If you want to think about kind of postmodernism from a contemporary Hollywood standpoint, The Matrix is kind of based on Jean Baudrillard's conception of these social constructs, and the Matrix was kind of becoming unplugged from this construct, right? And that everything we see is just man-made. Capitalism's a construct, the Constitution's a construct. So how can, if there is no truth, isn't most of the claims that they're making, how can they be true? That's where I've always been. It's always lost me on that. They're saying it's the end of reason. So aren't they trying to use reason to bolster their position? But they're saying that doesn't exist anymore. Yeah,
I mean, the major problem with postmodernism is that it's self-refuting. If you want to say that there's no truth, if you want to say that there are no meta-narratives, well, that itself is a statement about truth. It's itself a meta-narrative. And so the person who tells you, and Roger Scruton famously said this, the person who said that there is no truth is telling you not to believe him, because he's trying to convince you that his viewpoint's right. Truth is something we make up, and why should you listen to the postmodernist? Because your viewpoint is just as valid as his viewpoint, and nobody really believes this stuff anyway. Nobody lives as a consistent postmodernist. It's not as if you wake up and reality hits you. You don't get to make up reality. I mean, just ask somebody what they think about their pet moral issue, what they think about immigration, what they think about animal rights, what they think about abortion, and then usually they'll give you an answer, that takes a very objectivist approach to these issues. So it sounds nice. It sounds all, tolerant. It sounds, hey, let's respect each other. But really, nobody actually believes this stuff.
I mean, you know, it's funny because I was talking to somebody recently, and the term liberal, we always say the term liberal means, you know, of or pertaining to liberty, liberty from government, liberty from coercion. And I always feel today that, you know, that they took the term liberal to be, you know, freedom, liberty from truth, from reason, from morality. That, you know, we look at and we see cultural relativism everywhere, moral relativism. You know, they're holding heterosexual unions are the same as homosexual unions. Women are the same as men. And I mean, you find this a lot in these postmodern departments saying that gender is a construct. Literally, it doesn't matter the biological differences. This is a construct, and transgendering is completely normal and okay. You know what I mean? And it means that, and if you don't agree with that, you hate transgender people and you want to, you want to throw them off of buildings or something. You know what I mean? So it's like they, you know, it seems that they claim everything's a construct, while in the meantime trying to create merely which is a social construct. And the only way it survives is that, you know, these people in their cloistered sociology departments accept it and put it on their bookshelves. But it seems to be completely unhinged from any sort of reality or any sound argumentation. Would you agree? Oh, he froze.